second part, we're going to talk in more depth about some of the writing projects that Christopher mentioned, and also talk a little bit about a specific strand of artistological research. My colleague Christian Weikhoff is going to speak about his work over a long period with the Research Partnership on German artists in the collection, which includes major online publishing enterprise. Yeah,
sure. Thank you, Neil. So welcome everybody. I should say I arrived at Edinburgh University in September 2010, and I soon became very aware of the Artist Rooms project. And I made contact with my fellow journalists in arts and humanities here, including Professor Ian Boyd-White, who introduced me to Keith Hartley, who is the chief curator at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. And very quickly I began to work with Keith and other NGS staff, and we staged this conference in May 2011 on the German photographer August Sander. And in a way, I think this conference was probably, could be considered the first conference event of the research partnership. And it was important for me also because it was a defining activity of the research forum with German visual culture that I set up also in that year at the Talbot Rice Gallery launch there. And the conference was successful, and I ended up editing a cluster of papers along with Chris Griffin and Jennifer Mundy on August Sander, which involved some of the contributors to the conference, but also other contributors too. And you can see this is the cover for Take Papers number 19, which was we had a special focus on Sander in that issue. And alongside that, I should say that I worked also on the summaries on individual Sander works for Ruth Burgon's summary writing program, which has been very successful and very expansive, and she'll talk to you about that a little bit later on. And so in December 2012, Andrew Patrizio, the first director of the Artist Rooms Research Partnership, asked me whether I would be interested in working on Unsung Kiefer. And I'm a bit of a Keith fan in any case, so I didn't take much persuading, and I was happy to oblige. Although I didn't realise I had to say at that moment how much work I would end up doing on Unsung Kiefer, but that's all to the good, and it's of course resulted in a very extensive In Focus project, which has been published quite recently by Tate. I'm very, very pleased with the end result. Thanks very much to Chris Griffin and Celia White, Jennifer Mundy, and the whole Tate team for that. So one of the first events on Kiefer, if you like, was the Café des Artistes, which was held in May 2014. Of course, the Café des Artistes is the brainchild of Neil Cox, the second director of the research partnership, and it involved two PhD students, Lara Day, who you see here, and Lara, who was Ian Boyd-White's PhD student, now a postdoc, and Lara Demori, who is one of Neil's students. And so it was a fun participatory event, if I can pronounce it, in the Fruit Market Gallery Cafe, which was one of the best venues, I think, for the cafe series, quite simply because it is a cafe, and therefore created this lovely sort of informal atmosphere. And you can see also Alex and Ruth there looking at some works by Unsung Kiefer in one of the kind of Q&A sessions. So, sorry, excuse me a second while I get myself queued up here. Right. And this was followed later in this year by another panel discussion, this time at the Royal Academy, also on heroic symbols. And this panel was part of the programme of events for that Kiefer retrospective, major Kiefer retrospective at the RA. And it was a special panel on provocations in art. And Kiefer, of course, was a useful starting point in that respect. And Lara Day was also involved in that panel, as was Andrew Renton from Goldsmiths. And these panels at the Fruit Market and at the RA were podcast, so these events are available online as well. Now, shortly after the closure of the RA retrospective, another important Kiefer exhibition opened, this time an Artist Rooms exhibition in Carlisle at Tully House. And I was very honoured to be asked to open that exhibition along with Kerry Lewis, the managing curator of Artist Rooms. And this was an exhibition that also incorporated a lot of Kiefer's photographic work, which I was then focusing on for the large Kiefer project I've just mentioned. So there it is. I have to say that this exhibition also received a lot of press coverage, BBC coverage and local press coverage, so that was very gratifying too. And in tandem with Kiefer, I guess, I also focused on another giant figure of the post-45 German art scene as part of this research partnership, and that is Georg Baselitz. And I was asked to open the Artist Room's Georg Baselitz exhibition with a lecture back in October 2014. And this was followed up a few months later with yet another Café des Artistes, number 8. Probably the first one that took place outside of Edinburgh, I believe. And this involved Neil Cox, who was chairing proceedings, and Keith Hartley, again, and myself and Keith were in conversation. We had a PowerPoint and we were discussing various images, and it seemed to work very well. It was also attended, I should say, by Anthony Doffe. And of course, the Newark Museum in Leicester has a very important place in Anthony's heart because that's where he went as a child, really experiencing also modern art for the first time. So he was very keen to come to Leicester for that event. Of course, he had acquired works by Baselitz as well in the 1980s. And it was a suitable venue for me also because I'd worked already on the Expressionist collection. You can see Die Brücke, the bridge there above Anthony's head, one of the text panels. And so this cafe on post-45 artists, sometimes referred to as a neo-expressionist, took place in this gallery space devoted to first-generation expressionism. So it was quite an appropriate venue in that respect. And the format for the Baselitz, which was a kind of in conversation with Keith, seemed to work very well. And we emulated that format also for another event, another cafe, this time at Tate Modern in London. And this was number 14. And it featured, again, Keith Hartley, in conversation with my good friend Peter van der Meijden, chaired, of course, by Neil Cox. Wonderful venue, of course, at Tate Modern.
I wear a suit when I go to Tate Modern.
Yes, that's right, that's right. We had a few issues with podcast there, but the less about that, the better. Yeah, sometimes technical hitches, but these things occur. And also present at that event was Andrew Simons, who is in the house tonight, as it were, who is an AAH-ARTIST Collaborative Doctoral Partnership Award student. And this was very gratifying to receive one of these AAH-ARTIST awards, so we could work with NGS on their extensive voice collection. And so Andrew is engaged very much in that at the moment, and he's also working with Keith and Lucy and Chris and others on a voice exhibition which is forthcoming, opening towards the end of July. And Andrew's giving a talk tomorrow, in fact, as part of the conference, Invisible Powers, Voices, Early Drawings at 2 p.m. So you're welcome to, encouraged to turn up to that event there as well. So, as I say, I worked on the Artist Rooms program from the very outset, from 2011, and towards the end of 2015, then I had this kind of summative lecture at Plymouth. So I was asked to give a lecture for the Artist Rooms Gerhard Richter show, and I put Richter in a wider context of other artists, including Kiefer and Baselitz, and that was very well promoted. So as you can see, sort of Times Square, like sort of flashing neon display outside the gallery and the lecture theatre. So that was a very good event there too. And of course, as I say, in the last few months, in the last month really, the Tate In Focus on Ansam Kiefer has been published. I'm very pleased to say, a very large project, sort of several years in the making. About 33,000 words, I think, of material, and I'm very pleased that this has come out. And I'm so indebted to Chris Griffin and Celia White and Susanna Worth and others at Tate for making this happen. And I worked very closely, I have to say, also with the Kiefer studio and the artist himself. A lot of the material for this project came out of an interview that I conducted with Ansam Kiefer in 2013. But the studio were extremely helpful in supplying images for the project. I'll just very quickly come out of this because I know we're going to go on to Ruth in a second. I'll just go online. Sorry, is that it?
Yeah.
That's the interview. Tate also interviewed me about the project. Susanna interviewed me a few weeks ago, but you can get into the project here, and you can see. If the way the project functions, you have a sort of series of essays here, 8 essays. 6 of them are by me. The last 2 are by PhD students, although it's to say now postdocs. This is by Lara Day, and this is by my former PhD student, Hannah Abdullah. And so these are real sort of in-focus essays on this notorious work, Heroic Symbols. I'll be discussing this tomorrow at 9:30, so I won't go into it now. But just structurally, it's a very interesting way of publishing research. And it was great to be able to draw on the Tate collection, as well as the works within Artist Rooms. And in that process, I drew on also works by Warhol and other artists too, even Ian Hamilton Finlay at one point, who was a bit of a Kiefer fan. And in the acknowledgements, you can also link to the panel discussion based on this body of work, which took place at the RA. And so it's kind of interactive in that respect. So it's a very flexible way of working. You can dip in and out of essays, and each essay is connected to the Kiefer works in the collection. So you can arrive at it in various ways. And I think that's probably all I want to say about it.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
That's great. Does anyone have any questions for Christian about his work on German artists? I was just noticing that, of course, that In Focus project develops around also an interview
Yes.
with the living artists and a lot of interaction with the Kiefer studio.
Yes.
On the text, as I understand it, as well. They
Yes.
read the text.
Oh yes.
This is like very different, isn't it?
Yes.
An experiential model compared to the one that we normally work with on the summaries or whatever.
Yes.
And it was a risky, it's a risky strategy, isn't
Yes.
it? But beneficial sometimes.
The project went through various iterations, and also with Chris Griffin's help, and then in the latter stages with Celia White working closely with me on images. But yes, the Kiefer studio were heavily involved and read the text very, very carefully. And so, actually, out of that process of close reading, there were only a few minor changes required. And I did find the Kiefer studio very, very helpful in supplying images that were not in Tate collection. And so I was a little bit worried about it, I confess, initially, how that would go. But actually, it went very well. I think you would agree, Chris.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, the project took several years, but I think the end product I'm very pleased with, in any case.
Thank you, Chris. Oh.
To follow the question and the conversation that we've had about the in-focus structure that you alluded to, and how did you find fitting your research and the kind of questions that you wanted to explore into that structure? Because as I was talking about earlier, we like our in-focus projects to begin with an account of, just like with somebody, to begin with a very clear, almost catalogue kind of style account of what the work is. And in this case, the work is actually it's a body of very, very complex work that even has different titles attached to it.
Yes.
And it was quite challenging to do that kind of object-based kind of very clear and simple, basic, provide that account in a very basic way for this project. And how did the InFocus format and structure pose more challenges, or did it actually provide you with opportunities to think in ways that you didn't?
It's a very good question.
You know?
I think the latter. I think it provided me with opportunities. I mean, initially when we had the first version, and you suggested changes to create a more kind of rational structure, and also following a certain format that you use for InFocus, you might remember I was a little bit resistant, but a little bit reticent. But actually, those structural changes that we made were very, very good, and it allowed me also to understand the body of work much more clearly. And so being forced to write a clear description from the very outset also had a kind of knock-on effect in terms of the essays, how chronologies, iterations of the work, etc., etc., etc. And so I think that the structure was beneficial. Initially, as I say, I was a little bit concerned, but the restructuring was to the good. And so and it made me think more clearly, as you were saying earlier on in your presentation, about the object-based research and what that means. And sometimes we don't have those skills. So
and sometimes it's not. I mean, because it was interesting for us as well, editorially, because it's not easy. I mean, there's not a one rule fits all.
No.
And I guess that's what I'm alluding to as well. That it's very nice that you think it's better as a result of that. But I agree that it's challenging from a research point of view, because you kind of feel like I actually want to write this first, or I want to establish these parameters and investigate it in this way, and I don't want to have to follow a model. No. Because every work requires different ways of thinking.
But it's a flexible model, and one that is open access, and that's the great joy of it, of course, is that anybody can use this material, which is also gratifying for me. It's not existing in a publication that has a print run of 300 or something.
And costs £500.
And costs £500.
Great. I'm going to draw that to a close. Thank you so much, Christian. So he's trailed Andrew's paper and his own tomorrow. If you want to hear more about that stuff, you can. And I'm going to hand over, this segues neatly, I think, into the work that Ruth Burgon, who's finishing a PhD here at Edinburgh, has been doing over a long period with us in the Artist Rooms Research Partnership, developing a really rigorous process for the summary writing project. So I'm going to hand over to her. She's going to talk some more about
Great. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, and I'm also going to invite my interns to come up and say a little something about their experience of working on this project as well, just so that it's not all me talking about it, and you get a perspective of what it's like doing an internship that is writing for a website. It's quite different from a different sort of internship that you might do in a gallery. So the first thing I should say is that I'm probably the person who's been working in the research partnership right from the beginning, apart from Christian's obviously being on board since the beginning. So I started doing this before my PhD, and then I've carried on doing it all the way through. Neil's given me the grand title of Summaries Writing Coordinator, which I don't think I had at the beginning to define what I was for. Chris Griffin's already alluded to what summaries are. I was going to bring a couple up just so that you could get a sense of what I was actually talking about. I'm going to find one using the accession code, just so I'm finding the one I want. There we are. So whenever you look at a work on the Tate website, you get up the page like this, and then find this little bit called summary here. And this is exactly what Chris was talking about. These are succinct texts on each individual work of art in the Tate collection. And this was something that existed already on the Tate's website before Artist Rooms sort of was acquired by the Tate and National Galleries of Scotland. This was written by Susan McAteer, who was an intern working from 2012 to 13. She now works at the National Galleries of Scotland, so it obviously was beneficial to her career and all of that. So I think she found it a very valuable experience because she's continued working with us sort of onwards after her master's programme, which is good. I think it means she enjoyed it. So what I should say as well is that obviously this is a growing collection. The Artist Rooms collection began with that 700 mark. When we started, I think we had just over 1,000 works, and now there are 1,600. And it feels like we've been chasing them, you know, trying to write as many as we can. We're nowhere near having written 1,600 summaries on the works, but there are now 100 online, or 100, just over 100. And by the end of the research partnership, we'll be over the 200 mark. And I think, although that's a sort of small percentage, the way that it's been run is that the students and writers, who are also staff members as well working on it, have chosen the works that they wanted to write on. There's been just basically a free-for-all. Just any that haven't been written on already, you're allowed to write on. And I think that's meant that people have chosen works which are probably the most popular works, the things that people are going to look up first of all. There's a certain amount of strategy in it as well. When I started, I thought, well, I'll write on Richard Long's A Line Made by Walking, because lots of people know that work, and when they Google it, they'll find my little essay on it. So I think that's also something that writers and interns have done since then, and that's meant that some of the most sort of important and well-known works in the Artist Rooms collection have been written about. Having said that, some of the more obscure things, the drawings and prints, have been written about as well, and actually that's been beneficial as well, because this is really some of the first in-depth research on those specific works that's been done. People don't often write, well, this has been alluded to already, but writing a kind of essay that's specifically about the work, about a work of art, especially with drawings and prints as well. That's much less common. So in some ways this has been a really sort of valuable first stab at writing something on these works. What I should have said as well is that we've worked with 4 members of staff. So Glyn Davis, who you've already heard from, Andrew Patrizio and Kristen Wyckoff have all written some of these summaries. And I've worked with 24 students at the last count over the years, and we've got some of the master's students who are working on the project this year. Just wanted to have a quick look at this one as well, just so that we get a sense of what this structure is. This first paragraph is exactly what Chris Griffin was talking about earlier, a description of the work. And I describe it to, when I get new writers starting on this project, I try and get them to think about what it would be like to describe this work to someone who can't see it, and to do so in a way that is as unbiased as possible, so that you're just describing the thing in kind of clear, succinct terms and unambiguous terms as well. Then the structure goes on to look at the way that the piece was made, and certain interpretations that have been made of it, and not making any original claims most of the time. The idea is that this isn't original research, but really a summary of the research that has been done on the work by other art historians. Sometimes that's more challenging. If the work's more obscure, finding specific references to it in the literature is near impossible. So you've got to sort of find some of the themes or reference times when art historians have covered some of the themes of the work. And then the last bit is just kind of placing it in a wider context. So here Susan's referred to other works that Mapplethorpe, other portraits of Patti Smith by Mapplethorpe, and what happens very nicely is when you click those, you get the little thumbnail image come up, and you can follow through, look at that work, and I think a summary has been written on this one as well. So, and that's also by Susan. The other thing I should say as well is that Susan did a lot on Mapplethorpe. I've encouraged the writers over the years to focus on one artist, which has meant that when you're doing your research, you can be looking out for references to all the works that you're researching, which is sort of a more efficient way of doing it, really. But also, it kind of fits in with the monographic model of artist rooms. I hadn't sort of initially thought about it in those terms as a mission statement, but it was more of a practical concern. But in the end, it has meant that we've got this more monographic approach for each intern. Right, I'm going to invite the interns up. So we've got Aaron Shaw and Tessa Rosenstein, who started at the beginning of this academic year and have been working on summaries on Ed O'Shea and Diane Arbus. Those aren't yet online; they're still in the process of being edited by Chris's team, but hopefully they'll be online shortly and available to read. But I will hand over to them just to say a little something about their experience.
So just a word on the workshop experience for the interns. I know for me it was hugely helpful to be able to collaborate with my peers, both MSCs, as we were attempting to navigate this new, very particular style of writing that I was personally very unfamiliar with, and also having guidance from the PhDs who have had more experience with this formula. It was very helpful to come together once a week and exchange our summaries, what we've been working on through the week, and exchange strategies on research, and also not only receive feedback on what you've been working on, and feedback on editing and content and whatnot, but also to see how everyone else had been handling this formula and handling this writing style, and finding the most succinct and eloquent ways of incorporating as much information on these authors, on these artists as possible. I thought that was particularly
what I should have said actually is when we started this process, we didn't have a workshop format. We developed that kind of actually when Neil started as the director of the research partnership, thinking about how we could get better at writing summaries, because it was actually quite a shaky start. We didn't write many in the first couple of years. Because the writing style, it seems very simple, but it's so different from writing an essay. Even if you've got students who are very competent at writing, they haven't usually written this kind of thing before, and getting them away from expressing their own personal opinion and their own original research towards something much more objective, it's quite challenging. So, the most competent students still found this very difficult, and so we developed this workshop format so that we could do exactly what Tessa was just saying, exchange our ideas, read each other's work, and it's meant that they've learned how to edit as well as write, which I think is really kind of a valuable skill. But do you want to add anything else to that?
I think you pretty much.
Yeah. So Aaron's going to talk a little bit about what next once we've got them online.
So I think recently we just surpassed about 100. Summaries that the Artist Room's writing team have managed to kind of collect over the last few years. Over the last month they've all started to kind of go live and go online. So that meant that myself and one of our other interns for this year, Hayley Gold, who can't be here today, we've started to kind of take on the responsibility of starting to promote the summaries through social media. Because obviously, as great and fantastic as it is to write these things, it kind of comes to little use if no one actually reads them. So at the moment we're kind of organising and starting to queue up many social media posts that you'll start to see over the next month or so on Facebook and Twitter. To kind of promote the work that we're doing at the moment, and also kind of all the writing that's been done about works in the Artist Room's collection that's, as I've said, has kind of come out over the last few years. These are going to kind of manifest in different ways. One of the things that we were thinking of was creating countdowns to kind of highlight the wide range of kind of genres and styles and kind of materials and artists and all these things that are represented by the collection at large that we as interns have found interesting. And additionally, actually reaching out directly to other institutions and kind of tweeting them and stuff when they have exhibitions on that represent the work that we hold in our collection as well. Because, as Christopher Griffin has already said, these summaries aren't just interesting to read on their own, they're also very valuable research materials. As you said, it's quite interesting for us in that we've had this kind of internship structure. And I feel like it means that we have to kind of think about it in terms of the skills that we've gained. And obviously, kind of you've already flagged up these, you know, obviously we've got these skills in kind of writing and kind of copywriting and editing and all these things, but through my use of social media specifically, it's really made me start to think about the different ways in which we can express and relate to audiences didactically. Because as you all know, and as has kind of been a running theme throughout everything that we've heard today, audience engagement and education are really kind of at the core of what the Artist Rooms is. That's why we have the public programme, which we'll hear a bit more about in a second. And it's why we have this kind of monographic, you know, touring programme. So yeah, I think, yeah, for me personally, to be able to kind of help that and kind of really like engage with audiences on a very practical level has been, yeah, one of the main highlights of my time in the Artist Rooms. So yeah, that's me.
Good. No, that's really good. I just remembered I was going to flag this up as well, just to add another website to the plethora of Artist Rooms related websites that are out there. The Artist Rooms Research Partnership focused website, under its resources section, here has links to all the summaries that we've written. So this is our kind of hub for collecting them all together, because they are on the Tate website, and they are some of them are on the National Galleries of Scotland website, but they're going to be added in due course, more of them. But in that context, they're not linked to Edinburgh in necessarily, apart from they have a credit line saying that they were written as part of the research partnership, but there's no hub for the ones written by Edinburgh writers. So this is exactly what this is. So when you click on one of these, you'll find examples of summaries written on each individual artist, and this has been updated as more of them go online. So that's just to sort of point that out as an example. Just using that before was my main example. Yeah. So any questions on all that for these guys as well? Yeah.
I was just going to ask whether or not undertaking this activity has actually shaped the way that you think and write about art in other fields.
Yeah, it definitely has, because I think it's something that you said much. Kind of academic art historical writing lacks that very focused kind of object-based description. And I've really noticed since I started writing, my writing has changed. Yeah, even when it's come to kind of essays for modules on my degree, I find myself writing in a very succinct, very forward, object-focused manner. So yeah, 100%, it's definitely kind of affected the way that I understand writing.
I think it's an amazing discipline, right, for people to learn. It's not just the focus on the objects thing, it's also the discipline of writing very short text on a single thing, being able to move from that close descriptive thing to some general observations, you know, to engage the literature in that very tight framework. And you know, what Ruth has done really brilliantly is create this structure, which is a discursive structure, so that people are sitting around and discussing, you know, how well is that text doing that job. And this is kind of stuff that, I mean, speaking to people who are in academic walks of life, you know, working in art history, there often isn't much space for that, right? So I think one of the great things about this project, although it has been tough, it's been a steep learning curve for us to find the way to work in, and Ruth's been very creative about this. But I think actually it really has, it's provided something that a lot of PhD students need. That kind of work is actually work that people need, so that, you know, when you're trying to write your PhD or your master's dissertation or whatever, often there's a lot of writing struggle, and that's because there's probably just not been enough training, practice in writing. So I encourage anybody in this room who is interested in this kind of stuff, or indeed any other stuff in the collections of Tate or National Galleries of Scotland, would fancy writing a 700-word thing on it, to talk to Chris or to Chris Ganley. And so I'd like to write about this artist because it's really good training.
I think it's a really interesting exercise as well, because there's so many curators and academics out there with so much experience around these particular works that would really struggle to write one of these
Yeah.
texts. And I mean, we commission people not for art rooms but for other works all the time, and quite often we have to go back,
Yeah.
back and back again. It can be.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
in some ways, in the context of this conference as well, it makes you think, what place does art history have within the kind of broader social landscape of interest in art? And
Yeah.
how can art historians, how do they communicate to the general public,
Yeah.
whatever that may be?
Yeah.
Because there's, and you're right, and what's particular about these texts, I insist on calling them art historical texts. They're not art interpretation, as you said. Like that, it's not a small wall label panel, and it's not just one random subjective take on a particular work. They're art historical texts. And yeah, it kind of draws attention to arguably the gulf between the way that we talk about art in the art historical world and the way that interested audiences want to engage with art and discourse on art.
I mean, and on the other side, it's about unlocking collections, right?
Yeah.
So that if you read catalogue entries, you know, from the tape, you know, the extended catalogue
Yeah.
entries, they're extremely formal,
Yeah.
right? And they don't do this kind of succinct communicative
Yeah.
job, you know?
One thing I forgot to say actually as well is I feel like they actually serve an even more valuable function in the context of artist rooms because it's a touring collection around smaller regional galleries where actually a lot of the curating of the exhibitions will happen by those local curators. Then these act as a resource for those curators to develop, you know, they might not use them wholesale, but they'll develop, you know, their raw texts or their educational material based on this material that they can find. And it's easy to get hold of, you know, there's no barriers to getting it. So I think actually that's really valuable for this particular context.
Also going on that, I think it's just significant to point out that, as you mentioned, that some of these pieces that we've been writing about aren't the most popular by these artists, and so it's really helpful to provide really comprehensive scholarship on pieces that aren't necessarily extensively written about. I know a lot of the pieces I've written about, they weren't the most popular of Argus's work, but now there are now there's a little summary just
Body of
providing
work.
a good
Probably
context for those
particularly
works.
useful for Arbus since
Yes,
the
I
works
was
aren't
just gonna say that.
illustrated.
Yes, so because of the Arbus kind of estate, you can't easily reproduce her work, which some of you might know if you've tried to work on her work. So they aren't reproduced on the websites, and that description at the beginning is even more important in that context. So.
There's just a question here.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the structure of the seminars is obviously very good, and the internship process, giving interns the skills, the writing skills to develop is very good. The University of Edinburgh transferred that project into their own collection, so it would be approached by any other museums to actually kind of duplicate the process for improving their own collections.
No, we haven't done
No,
that.
and it's a good point because we had a conversation about this a while back. You know, I did think about we could set up a consultancy, right? but there is a way in which, you know, there is one of the reasons for talking about this today. It was about coming to the end of this 5-year partnership where we've learnt an awful lot, and actually, you know, we would be interested in finding other ways to use those skills, you know, to not let all that experience and
I think so many museums now have accessibility at the heart of the program.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, but we haven't yet worked out exactly how to do that. But we will continue to work with both museums in a, you know, probably less structured fashion than we are at the moment.
These summaries are kind of take and mention. So different museums have different kinds of
Models, yeah.
and we're quite proud of how we write about art and the kind of information that we provide and the way that we provide it. And takes acquiring artworks all the time, and most summaries now are being written by curators at the point of acquisition, but there's always more summaries to write. So
It's
if
the
anyone wants to
Fourth Road Bridge, isn't it?
contribute
Yes.
their writing on other works in the
Braille
collection,
Bridge,
not
I
art
think.
streams related, then you'll be very welcome.
Good. Look, we're going to have to move on because finally we just wanted to talk a bit about the broader internship program, expanding out from the internships on the Artist Rooms summary writing project. So just to explain, our MSc students, as part of their degree, can do an internship with an external organisation normally worth 40 credits out of their 180 credits, i.e., the amount of study they do, 40 credits. I can't do the math, but that must be about 25% or something, I don't know. So it's a substantial amount of time, in principle, people can spend on this. Notionally, it's 20 days. Now, this is a very unusual internship model because they're actually working internally, if you like, but with external partners, on these 40 credit things. And it's a big team. So it's a team model. And Lauren is going to speak about this. She's the lead intern this year. So, she's the one who has to carry the can for me in this. And she's going to speak a bit about this with some of her colleagues.
Hopefully that'll work. So, hi, thank you first of all for coming. My name is Lauren Moore and I was this year's lead intern for the Artist Rooms Research Partnership. This means, as Neil said, I manage a team of interns that produced a public events program to support the Artist Rooms collection and the research partnership, pictures of which you will see behind me. There are examples of our AAH-ARTIST program and our CLIPS program. So you'll see the advertisements and a couple of pictures of the events themselves. So first I'm going to just introduce the internship, talk about my experience and the AAH-ARTISTs. And then I'll pass you on to Roxana, who is a CLIPS intern, and she'll also share her own experience of the internship. So as Neil said, we're all MSc students, so we're kind of balancing this internship with the rest of our master's course. And we have to complete a 40 credit module essentially for the internship. I think everyone on the team can agree that this placement was probably one of our first choices for an internship, as it's an incredibly unique experience. Unlike many other placements where you work within a single institution and you go in one day a week, do a bit of work, usually database, and then you leave at the end of the day and come back next week. Our internship is fairly autonomous. We have guidance from Neil, but
not much.
Not much. But all the events are organised completely on our own, from booking venues and speakers to marketing and catering these events. This also allowed us to engage with a great variety of institutions in Edinburgh and understand a large range of artistic outlets that were here in the city. So far, we've organised 3 Café des Artistes this year, and with the 4th going to be arranged for the end of April. These evening discussion events focus on a particular artist in the Artist Rooms collection, as Christian has already said. And they were organised by our wonderful cafe interns, Emily, who is sitting there in the audience.
Wave.
Say hi. Yep. Take your credit. And also Astrid, who could not be here today. The idea was to have these events open to the public without needing any prior knowledge of the artist in question and discuss their work over a glass of wine. So it was particularly through these events that we engaged with a great range of different academics and artistic institutions, as we needed speakers and the venues changed constantly. And I think this was very good because it allowed different areas of Edinburgh to engage with the Artist Rooms collection, and we brought a new set of a new audience to every single cafe because we were moving around constantly. This program was particularly challenging at times because we had to negotiate with a lot of different venues to find hosts, constantly try and find new speakers, and this was often difficult to facilitate on a budget particularly. However, I think these events were incredibly successful, as they not only promoted academic research to the general public, but also encouraged an awareness of the galleries and workshops that may not have been on someone's radar beforehand. However, it wasn't just all big gestures like booking venues or hosting speakers though. One of the most interesting, though sometimes stressful things about the internship was the variety of jobs that both programs required that no one really thought about until we began working. It's the small, perhaps unglamorous tasks, like spending a morning cutting out flyers for that evening event. I cut out 100 flyers by hand with scissors. Great. Or learning how to pour wine, or figure out how to transport a PA system, or how on earth FedEx works, and copyrights and getting permission for images, and that has been mentioned a couple of times already, so I think you all know how difficult that can be. I think in the end though, despite the stress and despite the problems they've caused along the way, they only really enrich the experience and give us a taste for what working behind the scenes in an arts organization really requires of us. A great amount of flexibility, skills, and seeing importance in the most mundane tasks that really hold the whole event together. Before I pass you on to Roxana, I'd like to mention that in the beginning we did have a training day hosted by my predecessor, the former lead intern, and she warned me it was going to be a bumpy ride. I told my mother that I got this internship, and I was very, very nervous about it, and she just told me to fake it until I make it. So I didn't really understand how much work this internship would involve until we started, and at times it was a really steep learning curve. We got very stressed, we were very tired, and we made mistakes, or at least I certainly did. But I'm not afraid to admit that, because in fact at the end, the fact that we could work together as a team through these difficult parts only makes me appreciate the team that I worked with even more. So thank you to my intern team, and I hope after the internship you'll be going on to great things.
Well, just to add a few more things that our amazing lead intern has said, I was a film program intern as well as an evaluation intern for the research partnership. And as a film program intern, I worked alongside my colleague Francesca.
Take your credit, take a bow.
And we curated a series of clips for the 2015-2016 year, which is the third and last edition of such a film program of events organised by the Artist Research Partnership. So I would say one of the most distinctive and very exciting aspects of such a role was, as Lauren said, the uniqueness of such an internship, of having the freedom and responsibility in every single aspect and facet of our job descriptions, from choosing films that had barely been shown in the UK, which obviously had
some problems.
unexpected reactions in many cases, because sometimes not even the speakers
Had seen the film.
Had seen the film itself.
It was potluck quite often. It was just, well, we'll try it and see what people like.
but that made it even more special. That made it even more unique as well. So also choosing the venue and the format of the event itself, as well as being aware of a relatively tight budget in order to manage both our time and the available funds that we had. So the financial restrictions were certainly a challenge, but one which made the internship experience much more richer in that sense, as we learned something to improve on from every event that we held. So for instance, we had to prioritize digital format films over DVDs or 16mm films due to time and financial constrictions. But during the process, we liaised with a number of different entities, from commercial galleries in New York, such as Pace Gallery, which was very exciting, to also film distributors such as BFI. So, the same applied to the choice of venue as well, where we had to be respectful of the budget, and so we researched a number of different venues that we would be able to adapt our events to. So we decided to host all of our Clips events this year, excluding this special one, of course, in the very versatile space that Summer Hall is, which some of you might know, which is just around the corner. And it's considered like a cultural hub in the city, really, yeah. So this offered a very unique insight on what it is like to work for an institution, you would say, like the Research Partnership. So which encourages for us to work and to think outside the box as well. So this also was really useful as an evaluation intern because I communicated to my team suggestions from the audience from our events that we could put into practice, which could go hand in hand with many of Anthony Doffey's objectives when he started the research partnership, which was increasing and extended the visibility and accessibility of contemporary art to new and young audiences. So for instance, the feedback from evaluation forums helped to assess the impact of these types of events on a more local level, which is open to the public rather than restricted to a rather more academic or institutional setting. So overall, being an intern for the Artist Rooms Research Partnership has been, as Lauren has said, an invaluable experience. It has given us the opportunity to increase our confidence in decision making and managing two different types of events, the cafes and the clips, throughout the first part of our master's degree, or almost all of it really. So the various challenges we have been faced with ultimately had a very positive impact on us individually and as a team, I believe, thanks to the constant support and hard work from our lead intern, who constantly encouraged and enabled very good communication and teamwork within the group. So thanks to the particular nature of this internship, we have had the opportunity to work independently and to a professional level, I think, within an academic context.
I think I'm passing around 50 pounds to everyone.
So thank you very much.
Is there any questions about that dimension of what we've done?
Yeah, I'd like to ask, from the evaluation forms, what percentage of the general public attended the events? Because I'm one of those people. And I'm
You're a loyal follower.
Yes. Well, I think it's a very valuable and exciting thing to attend, and I'm disappointed, I think, that I don't feel that there are more members of the general public who maybe know about it or bother.
Yeah, so thanks to also our marketing interns and social media interns, we have managed to increase our numbers from previous years.
Percentage of
Percentage of visitors.
who are non-university.
Yeah.
I think particularly Maria, who's in the audience as well. Hi, Maria. She worked very hard to try and get a wider range of audiences for us. She would contact different mailing lists. She would try and get more galleries to tweet about our events, more social media activity. Unfortunately, there is an aspect where, particularly with social media, the people who are already interested in art are following these art pages. So it's kind of trying to find different avenues and different ways to get people who wouldn't have ordinarily followed or kept an eye on artistic events anyway. And that's a real challenge, is trying to get more and more people aware of that. And I think moving the venues around helped a lot, particularly with Summer Hall, because Summer Hall isn't only just a visual arts venue, it's very much a cultural hub. And that's actually, I think we had a large number of the general public in our first clips as well.
Our first clip we sold out.
And that was very, very helpful, and that helped bring more people to the general public in.
But it is a slow process.
Yeah, it's a very, very slow process.
I definitely think it's the case that when we moved things around different venues, you know, because we're at every one, you notice different audience constituencies. So that is something we learned, because we were forced to change venues 3 years ago. The first time we did it, started off doing Talbot Rice, and then we were forced to go to Fruit Market, and we suddenly noticed it was a slightly different constituency. So that's because these organisations have their own mailing lists,
that's
and
they put it out to their friends.
Exactly.
And so that's why we actually have tried to do that more, to move it around, just exploring what that means in terms of different audiences.
Another aspect we did is that back in November we did Wham! Let's Talk About Roy Lichtenstein, which you'll see eventually on the slideshow, which was an event aimed at 16 to 25-year-olds. Because we noticed that although we did get a couple of art history students, we weren't getting much of that demographic, particularly of the younger end of that spectrum. So that was very important, and we did get a lot of people who were still in schools and doing their A-levels in art history. coming to that event, and we did see a couple of people from that event in other artist rooms events later in the year. So we think that helped a lot, is giving very focused workshops on particular age groups or particular kind of demographics that may have an interest after coming to one of our events to the rest.
Okay, I think we're probably going to have to stop, and I'm going to have to apologise because having trailed to you the offer of Carver, the wine merchants have delivered wine. Okay, so this is, I know, disappointing, but we have lots of wine. Isn't that right?
Yes, we do have lots
We have lots of wine, and we do have popcorn.
You will be rewarded.
Okay, we have wine and popcorn and water.
And juice.
And juice. So please come and grab some, and we'll be getting ready the film screening. So we'll just have a short 5 minutes break. Please can help yourself. If it's not too early for you. Yeah, yeah.